When I made these saws, I wanted to have a go at making my own saw plate and filing the teeth by hand. And I tried several different methods of doing this, from using paper templates that I printed from the internet to using old hacksaw blades as guides that I clamped to the plate. And I also made some wooden guide blocks to try and follow as well. And that worked okay for the 16 tooth per inch saw. But when it came to the 22 tooth per inch saw, I was finding it difficult to get nice even tooth spacings. And that was mainly because with the 16 tooth, I had a little bit more room for correction if I wasn't quite on the line. But when it came to this 22 tooth, you had to be absolutely bang on the line, otherwise you end up with what they call calves and cows, which is one big tooth and one little tooth. So I was finding it hard to get them nice and even and consistent. So to try and help with this, I came up with a simple jig that would lay out all of the teeth evenly prior to filing them. And I've been sitting on this jig for probably about a year now, and I finally got the time to make it, or make a more advanced version of my original idea, and I'd like to show you that today. So this is the box for the jig. This is made from black corian with a oak base, and this corian box, I've polished it to a mirror finish, and I've actually mitered all of the edges of the box so it's absolutely seamless. And anyone that's worked with corian knows how brittle it is when you come to a feather edge. So I'm really pleased with the way that this box has turned out. You can't see a single join in it, so I'm happy with that. The corian just lifts up away to reveal the jig. I'll start with these. I'm calling these indexing plates, and as you can see there's a number stamped into it, and this plate thickness is different on every one, and what this number relates to is how many TPI that plate will set the jig to. So that one would be 20 TPI. This one would be 14 TPI. This one 18, and so on. There's a selection in there. And this is the jig itself, made from brass and 01 tool steel. With a rosewood handle and then high carbon steel plates at the front. And the way that this jig works is you have a locking thumb screw on the top, which you undo, and then back here is an adjuster thumb screw. And as you adjust that back thumb screw, you can see how the plates at the front open up, and that's what sets the gap between each tooth. So for instance, if you wanted 18 TPI saw, you'd select the 18 TPI reference plate and insert it between the two front plates and close this back thumb wheel so it pinched on that reference plate, and then lock the thumb wheel at the top. Now the jig is set to 18 TPI. I don't know how well the camera's picking that up, but the distance between the front of that steel plate and this one here that's behind it, that just hangs down a fraction below the bed of the jig, that distance is set to 18 TPI. The way this works inside here, I wind that right out. Again, I'm not sure if the camera's picking this up, but it's spring loaded inside of here, so it's always got tension on it. So when you choose an indexing plate you want, 14 TPI, insert it in just so it's nipped up, and then lock it into position. And now that's set to 14 dpi. So that's how to set the jig up. So what I'd like to do now is show you how the jig works. If I just move it out of the way. I've got a very old gent saw, and I've had this gent saw since I started woodworking, and it's had a good few attempts at sharpening it, and again the camera's probably not picking it up, but the teeth are pretty knackered on this now. They're all uneven and they're quite dull. So what I want to do is completely remove these teeth and then re-tooth it using the jig. And what I want to try and do is do a progressive pitch tooth, re-tooth. Not for any reason other than just to demonstrate how the jig works and how easily you can change TPI with the jig. So I've got the saw vise set up. I've had to put some cramps on it because, like I say, it's the middle of winter, it's very damp in the garage, and this jig has been sitting in here for a while. This was nice and straight along here once upon a time. So what I've got here is a flat file that I've fixed into a piece of MDF. I've just ran a groove in the MDF the same thickness as the file, so it's a nice tight fit. Pushed it in there, and what that does is it sits alongside the saw plate, and it keeps the file nice and square to the plate. So what I'm going to do is just remove all of these teeth now, just by filing across the top of them like this. Now if you were just re-sharpening a saw, you'd only need to do a few strokes with this file just to take the teeth down so they're even. But because I'm re-toothing this saw completely, I need to remove all traces of these teeth. So that's what I'm going to do now. It's probably going to take a few minutes, but essentially just working the file along the saw plate, like so, just checking, making sure it's all going down nice and even. So I'll get on and do that. It's a good idea just to check reference with a straight edge, just to make sure that the plate is nice and flat along the top. Just checking again with the straight edge, and that's lovely and flat. So I should have mentioned before that the way this jig works is you need to use it with a hacksaw, and what you do is do a cut, and the back plate here drops into that cut, and then you use the front of the jig as a guide to do another cut, and you work your way along the entire saw plate doing a series of cuts all the way along, and then those cuts can then be used as reference markers for your file. So like I say, you can get them really nice and accurate and even the whole way along. So what I've done is I've got a junior hacksaw, and I've modified one of the blades. So I've taken the set off of it completely because you want the cuts to be as narrow as possible. So this saw plate is 0.5 of a millimetre thick. So you want to try and make the hacksaw blade the same. So just put it on an anvil or between two hammers and just knock the set off of it so it's completely flat, no set. And what I've also done is just ground the first few teeth away, about an inch or so. I've just ground the teeth away, and that just helps the saw to start, so it's not chattering as it goes in. So, and the biggest thing to re-toothing any saw is consistency. So consistency in the filing, consistency with this jig, with how many strokes you do per cut. So as long as you're nice and consistent, you should get pretty good results. So to start, I'm going to do 22 TPI for the first inch or so, and then I'll gradually work up, probably down to about 16 or 14 TPI at the rear of the saw. The highest TPI this jig will do is 24 TPI, and that's with the two plates bottomed out against each other. So like that, that's the narrowest distance, so and that will give you 24 TPI. But the light's not great in here and I haven't got my magnifier, so I think I'll start at 22. So you can start at the toe or the heel of the saw. I prefer to start at the toe, and what you have to do is just on the very end, I'm going to have to move this, down in the vise. Again, the lower you can get the plate in the vise, the better, because it stops it from chattering. Okay, I'm not sure how well this vise is going to work now, but give it a go. So, like I say, start at the very tip of the very toe of the saw, and you want to try and put a cut as close to the end as you can. So 3 strokes I've done there, and you only need to go down a fraction, probably no more than ½ millimetre. So 3 wasn't quite enough. I'm going to do 5. And that's just about right, maybe a touch more. I say, because I've knocked the set off of this, and it's quite dull now as well, it's going to take a few more strokes. So nice and close to the end. And then what happens next is you get the jig and you just pull it back along the saw plate until it drops. You'll feel it drop into place. And holding it nice and straight and level, you can use the front plate to reference the saw, and trying to be as accurate as you can. Seven cuts. Lift the jig up, drag it back so it drops in. 7 cuts. Cuts. Again, just being as consistent as you can with the saw cuts and the pressure. Just slides back, and I've put a slight bevel on the back of that plate, so as you drag it back it naturally just wants to drop into the cut. And so on. What I'm going to do is going to work my way a couple of inches in, maybe 1.5 inches, and then I'll restart the video from there. Okay, so I've worked about 1.5 inches along now with the 22 TPI setting. So now I'm going to change it to 20 TPI. Let's just grab the indexing plate for 20, insert it in. Just nip it up and lock it off. And it's that easy to change settings, and then you can just continue along. Okay, another couple of inches done, so I'm going to go down to 18 TPI now. Okay, a little bit further along now. I'm going to go down to 16 TPI. I'm trying to rush my way through this because it's absolutely freezing out here today. Okay, nearly there. Just going to move the saw along just to get to the end. I'm going to finish off at 14 TPI. Here. Again, stamped with 14. And another thing I did want to show you quickly, I've got one indexing plate here that's stamped with a 0, and that's a very fine plate, and what that can be used for is for fine adjustment. Say if you put the 18 TPI in, it wasn't quite cutting to 18, you can use this 0 referencing plate just to increase the slot ever so slightly. Or you can make custom TPI if you want to. Like I say, it's infinitely adjustable with this threaded screw at the back, so you can set it to whatever you desired. I'm going to stick with 14 TPI at the moment. So, we're nearly there now, last one. The plate's just getting a little bit whippy at the end there just because the vice isn't holding it so well. So that the jig is as easy to use as that, and just looking at this, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but they're all very even, nice and straight. So I've rushed this a bit today because it's very cold out here. But there you can see just how nice and even all the cuts are. So what happens now is you put it back into the saw vise, and you can just come and start to file, and the file will just drop into each one of these notches, making it really easy to start the file. So another thing I should mention, that another benefit of using a hacksaw blade to do the initial cuts is it removes a lot of the material. And because hacksaw blades are so cheap in comparison to nice saw files or needle files, then it saves a lot of wear on the files. Because a good quality saw file is going to cost you back with postage £10–15, but hacksaw blades are cheap as chips, so it's worth them taking away the material and saving the files. Now for my saws I used a Nicholson file, a Nicholson saw file. It's a double extra slim, but what I've done is I've picked up a Loeb. Comparing the two, I have to say the quality on this one is really nice compared to the Nicholson. I mean, the Nicholson's okay, but this you can really see the quality difference in this. Just feels a lot better, and you can see the machining on it's really nice. But one thing that is a lot different is the profile. So the Nicholson comes to quite a fine point, whereas the Loeb is quite rounded on the smaller edge. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to try using this anyway and see how it goes, but I suspect for the 22 TPI that might leave too big a gullet, so I might have to change back to the Nicholson, but we'll see. So I've got the saw set up in the vise. Okay, I've just had to set up a light because I couldn't see a thing, and I've just given the Velour a quick try, and as I suspected, the edge profile is a bit too big for this 22 TPI set. So I've switched back to the Nicholson file, which, like I say, comes to a much sharper point. So I'm just going to start filing this saw now. And like I say, the file can just drop into those notches and just be nice and consistent. You can work your way along. I'm just going to come back to the first couple that I did with the other file, just to try and rectify them a bit. So like I say, consistency is the key with sharpening saws. You have to do equal strokes, equal pressure as you can, and you try and maintain the angle that you want. I'm filing this to rip cut as well, so I haven't got to worry about fleam angles. That's nice and straightforward. So I'm up into the 20 TPI stage now. You can imagine how difficult this is if you were just using a paper reference plate, a paper guide, because you'd have to be absolutely perfect with each file stroke. But the beauty of having all of these notches is the file just drops straight into it. Into the 18 TPI now. Just checking my progress. And these teeth are just with 3 passes of the file, these teeth are pretty much fully formed. As I say, the majority of the material has been taken away with the hacksaw. Coming up to the 16 TPI stage now, I think. Looks like it. So I'm just going to move this along. Nice. Again, try and drop it as low as possible. Helps to reduce the chatter. So what I'm doing is I'm using the very, very tip of the file just to locate in the notch. And you can hear it just drop into place. And these bigger teeth are going to need another pass, because they're not quite coming to a point yet. I think we're into the 14 TPI stage now as well. I might just give this velour another try, because I think it might be alright back here. Like I say, it's a really, really nicely made file, Swiss file, but the geometry on it is slightly different. Yeah, it's probably alright for smaller TPI. For this instance, I think the Nicholson is a preferred file. And that's pretty well it. I'm just going to come back and just work on these back few teeth where the TPIs are smaller, but all the front ones are pretty well done. Just getting down level with the saw, and you can see which ones aren't quite coming to a point yet. I'm about here backwards. I'm just going to give them one extra stroke. And what you can do is if you grab a permanent marker and just run it backwards along the blade, along the teeth, not forwards because you'll cut your tip off. Run it backwards like that, and now you can see, well, if the light was better, you can see which ones you filed and which ones you haven't. So just start there. And the 14 TPI obviously take a little bit more filing. What I'm going to do, I think, is just go over with a very light pass on all of them. But it's a good example that no one saw file fits all saws. You have to try and pick one that best fits your particular saw and what you're doing with it. Like I say, this for law, but I think it would be better with sort of maybe 12 TPI and lower. But finding a good quality saw file for really high TPI, like 18 TPI and above, I've found it quite tricky. I mean, this Nicholson one has been about the best one I've found so far. I have got a backhoe as well somewhere, which I've not tried. So yeah, it's just worth trying all of them. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. That is actually the backhoe. That one. That's not the Nicholson. The Nicholson is this one. Okay, I'd say the quality on the backhoe is better than the Nicholson. So yeah, that's a nice file, that backhoe. So anyway, I'm just going to go from there. Sorry, the camera battery died. So what I did there is I just went along and did a light pass over the over all of the teeth, and I don't know how well it's going to pick this up, but it's come out really, really nicely. All the teeth are nice and even. All nice and sharp. So what I've got to do now is just set the teeth. So I'm using one of these Eclipse saw sets, and I've modified the hammer down inside here. What I've done is I've taken it apart and taken that hammer out and just ground it down to a finer point, just so it can get onto the smaller teeth. Originally this hammer is too big, you end up hitting two teeth at the same time. So they're pretty simple to take apart. Just take it apart, take the little hammer out and just grind it down so it's a little bit thinner. But essentially what you do is start at the toe, work your way along, skipping one tooth all the way, and flip the saw around and just repeat and push the other tooth the other way. I should also mention that this it has a number ring around the front here, and that doesn't necessarily correlate with what TPI you're doing. To be honest, I don't actually know what that number is in reference to, so it's a little bit trial and error to see what position works best for your saw, because you don't want to overset the saw, because it can wander. It will give you a really coarse cut, but on the other hand you don't want to underset the saw, because then the plate will bind as it starts to cut. So it's quite an art to get it just right. I'm just going to put it on that very first tooth and just give a gentle squeeze. Don't need to go mad on it. The light's a bit tricky. Just a gentle squeeze just to push that tooth over. Right, I've just worked my way across the other side of this plate. So, take it out now. And the moment of truth, will it cut? Yes. That's cutting nicely. And what I'm looking for when you're doing these initial cuts is to see if the line of the blade is wanting to curl off in one direction or another, and you'll soon see, you'll feel it and you'll see it. It will start to wander one way or the other. But as it happens, that's cutting pretty straight. That's beginner's luck, that is. That's cutting very nicely straight away. I say, the majority of the time you will find that the blade will want to wander one way or the other. And the mistake that people make is they come back and they try to reset the teeth. You know, and then they come back and they try again and it will wander, and then they'll come back and try and reset again. But if it is wandering, as long as you haven't gone mad with the setting, if you just grab a standard sharpening stone and whichever way it's pulling towards, you just grab the stone and grab the saw and you very lightly rub the saw along the stone, and then you do a test cut again, and what you'll find is it will correct it and it will start to cut straight. And you're not hurting the teeth in any way by doing this, as long as it's just a few strokes. It should only need a couple of strokes to make it start cutting dead straight. So that's the easiest way to correct a wandering saw, is just to grab a sharpening stone and just do a very light pass across the stone like so, whichever way the saw is pulling in. If it's really bad, then you might have to come back and flatten off the teeth and then reset from the beginning again. But as long as, like I say, as long as you're really consistent with the setting tool, nice consistent pressure, and even all the way across, you should be onto a good thing. So that's it. So this saw's it's cutting nicely. I might just come back and just give it a very final sharpen now that the teeth are set. But essentially that is that's it. That's lovely. It's cutting nice and straight. Cutting plumb is down to user, but that's not what you're looking for. If you can cut at an angle, what you're looking for is a straight line. with no deviation off of that line. So yeah, I'm really pleased with the way this is cutting. Nice fine line. Cuts smoothly all the way down to the back, no binding. So the initial teeth makes starting the saw really nice and simple. No chatter. Just dig straight in. And then the rear coarser teeth, which are doing most of the work. Give the speed of cut. Cross cut as well, just as well. Yeah, lovely. So that's it essentially. That's the jig and that's the saw. I'd love to know any feedback on what you think of the jig. Like I said, I've been sitting on this idea for over a year now, and I've only finally got around to being able to make it. The original jig I made was much simpler than this. It just was really the two end plates with no adjustment, and it was fixed at a certain TPI. But then I evolved the concept and came up with this idea that that's able to be adjusted to any TPI that you want. And as far as I know, there's nothing else like it. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know what you think. Like I say, I think it works great. I'm really pleased with how it works. It just takes the stress out of re-toothing saws. For someone like me that just sharpens saws occasionally, or sorry, re-tooth saws occasionally, I think it's going to be great. So yeah, that's it. That's the jig. Hope you enjoyed this video. It's going to be a long one, but yeah, let me know what you think. And I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.